You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
Have you ever heard something at night and convinced yourself it was just your imagination? For Sophia, a new tenant in a rundown apartment building, the noises coming from the vacant unit next door became impossible to ignore. Faint whispers, chilling screams, and slow, deliberate scratching from behind the wall. Despite her landlord's dismissive reassurances, Sophia's dread steadily grows as she begins to uncover the building's terrifying past and a decade-old secret hidden just inches away. As events escalate and reality blurs, she's forced to confront the horrifying truth about Unit 4C, a truth that might be better left undiscovered. Join us as we reveal the bone-chilling account of Whispers from Unit 4C, a story so hauntingly real it will keep you awake, questioning every noise you hear in the dark. Subscribe now and enter the nightmare, if you dare.
I press myself against the cold plaster wall, my heart hammering in my chest. The scream comes again, muffled, desperate, seeping through the vents from the supposedly empty apartment next door. In the darkness of my small living room, I choke back a sob of terror. Something is inside the wall, clawing to get out. This can't be real. I clamp a shaking hand over my mouth, stifling my breath as the noises continue just beyond the peeling wallpaper. Plaster dust rains from the ceiling with each heavy thud. Every instinct screams at me to run, to flee this nightmare, but I'm frozen in place, horrified. I can't help imagining what might be on the other side of that wall, the side no one has seen. A hidden door, a secret room. A putrid stench suddenly hits me, turning my stomach. It's the smell of death. I'm sure of it. And it's coming from Unit 4C. 2 months earlier, I stepped into this building thinking I'd found a bargain. I was wrong. When I moved into apartment 4B, I told myself the flickering hall lights and musty smell were just part of an old building's charm. I needed a fresh start on a tight budget. The brick apartment block on Holloway Street was worn and neglected, but it was cheap and it was mine. On move-in day, the landlord, Mr. Greeley, handed me the key as we reached the 4th floor. He was an older man with hollow eyes and a smoker's rasp. My door was at the end of the hall. Right next to it was Unit 4C. I asked casually if anyone lived there. He snorted, "Vacant for years. Don't worry about it," already turning to leave. As his footsteps echoed away, I eyed the door of 4C. The brass number hung lopsided, the C almost falling off. It was dark and silent behind that door. Vacant, I thought with relief. No neighbours to disturb me. For the first week, life in 4B was quiet and uneventful. I worked long hours and spent evenings unpacking. The building made its share of odd noises, pipes clanking, floorboards creaking, wind whistling through drafty windows. Alone at night, I sometimes found myself listening intently on edge, but I laughed it off as new apartment jitters. Then one night, I awoke to a scream. It was past midnight, and the high-pitched cry cut through the silence like a knife. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. It sounded like it came from somewhere close, but muffled. I held my breath, straining to hear more. Only silence followed. After a few minutes of nothing, I eventually convinced myself I had imagined it. A nightmare, or a distant sound carried on the wind. A few days later, I had nearly forgotten about it. That weekend, my friend Ellie came over. We had wine and laughed, filling my little apartment with welcome warmth and noise. I felt almost safe. After Ellie left around 11 p.m, the apartment felt especially empty. I double-checked my locks and turned off the lights, ready for bed. That's when I heard it, coming from the wall I shared with 4C. I froze in the dark living room, listening. It was faint but distinct. I flipped the lights back on and the noise stopped at once. Gathering my nerve, I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. Only dead silence and the thud of my own heartbeat. Probably just mice, I thought. An old building like this could have rodents behind the walls. Still, it struck me how deliberate the scratching had sounded, almost patient. The next morning I caught Mr. Greeley as he was making his rounds. I mentioned the noises and the scream. He waved it off immediately. "No one's in 4C. You probably heard the pipes or a TV from another floor," he said. His dismissive tone was clear. He thought I was jumping at shadows. He did, however, mutter about setting some rat traps, but the disturbances only escalated. Every couple of nights, deep in the dead of night, I woke to, or worse, an agonized scream that seemed to echo through the vents. Each time I'd fling on the light and the sound would vanish, leaving me shaking and uncertain of my own ears. And the scratching grew more frequent, sometimes a slow scrape, sometimes a frantic clawing that would start and stop without pattern. I lost sleep, dreading what the next night would bring. To calm myself, I took to leaving a radio on low at my bedside, hoping to mask the unnerving noises. One night around 3 a.m, the radio flickered to static. Half asleep, I reached to adjust it and distinctly heard a broken whisper emerge from the static saying my name, Sophia. I nearly dropped the radio. I sat up until dawn after that, every light in the apartment on, my mind racing. Was I being warned? Or was I truly losing my sanity? The following day, I confided in Ellie. Concerned, she offered to stay the night with me. If we both heard the sounds, it would confirm I wasn't hallucinating. Ellie slept over on my couch. We stayed up late, the TV comedy doing little to settle my nerves. Hours passed quietly, but just after 3 a.m, a sudden, rapid scratching from the 4C wall made us both jolt upright. The scratching intensified into a frenzy, then "Oh my God, do you hear that?" Ellie whispered, eyes wide in terror. The entire wall trembled with each blow. A framed picture crashed to the floor. "Call the police!" I gasped. As Ellie dialed 911 with shaking hands, I stood transfixed, staring at that wall. The pounding was so loud, I half expected to see it crack. Then, just as abruptly as it began, the noise stopped. We were left in a thick, ringing silence. Minutes later, 2 police officers arrived. We led them to 4C, insisting someone was inside. Mr. Greeley came up as well, fumbling with his keys and protesting that the unit was empty. Under our frantic urgings, he unlocked 4C and the cops swept through with flashlights. We all stood in the doorway, peering into the darkness of the vacant apartment. It was empty, truly empty. No furniture, no intruder, no sign of life. Dust hung in the air, undisturbed. The officers checked every room, every closet. They found a bedroom window unlocked and suggested maybe a stray animal or vandals had gotten in at some point. But there was nothing to explain the scream or the pounding we heard. I felt on the verge of hysterics. How could there be nothing? One officer gently suggested we might have misinterpreted normal building noises or that stress and lack of sleep were affecting us. I could see the doubt in their eyes. They left with polite reassurances, but I knew they didn't believe us. Mr. Greeley locked 4C and gave me a long, hard look. "I don't know what you're trying to pull," he hissed under his breath, "but don't make trouble. Let it be." There was real fear in his eyes, not just anger. He hurried downstairs without another word. Ellie was badly shaken. We both were. The next day I called in sick, determined to find some answers. I spent the afternoon at the library digging up old newspapers and records on the building. What I found made my blood run cold. About 10 years ago, 3 young women, tenants in this very building, had vanished without a trace. The last to disappear was a 25-year-old named Helen Morgan, who lived in Unit 4C. None of the women were ever found. They were presumed victims of a serial predator. The cases went cold. I sat in the library archive room, hands trembling on the clippings. 3 missing tenants. 4C was involved. The uneasy feeling in my gut now felt like lead. What if those screams in the night were Helen's? What if the scratching was her trying to get out? That evening, I caught Mr. Greeley in the first-floor hallway. I confronted him with the clippings, demanding to know if he remembered Helen or the others. His reaction was explosive. He yelled at me to mind my business, swore he knew nothing, and even snatched the papers from my hand. His face went red and his voice shook, whether from fury or panic, I couldn't tell. "Drop it," he growled, voice low. "Don't go poking where you shouldn't. This building has a way of eating people who pry." He slammed his door in my face, leaving me rattled and more suspicious than ever. I was sure he was hiding something, and if he wouldn't help, I had to find out the truth myself. I remembered the master keys hanging on a hook in the maintenance closet. Late that night, while the building was quiet, I snuck in and grabbed the one labelled 4C. My heart was pounding, but I knew this might be my only chance. Back up on the 4th floor, I stood outside Unit 4C with a flashlight in hand. My breath caught as I turned the key in the lock. The door creaked open, and I stepped inside, leaving it slightly ajar behind me. The air was stale and cold. I swept my flashlight slowly across the living room. Every surface was coated in dust. I could see our footprints from the police search days before. "Hello?" I whispered, voice barely audible. Only silence answered. I moved further in. The darkness felt heavier here, as if the shadows were watching. In the back of the apartment lay the bedroom. Almost immediately, I noticed a faint odour, a sickly sweet smell under the dust and mould. I gagged, pulling my shirt up over my nose. My flashlight beam traced the walls. Near the closet, I saw a section of wallpaper peeling away from the plaster. Odd. This part of the wall jutted out slightly, forming an uneven seam. My pulse quickened. Gently, I ran my hand over it. It sounded hollow behind. With trembling fingers, I gripped the loose wallpaper and pulled. The brittle paper tore off in long strips. Beneath it, a large plywood panel had been nailed crudely into a hole cut in the wall. A hidden compartment. My mouth went dry. I knew I should stop and get the police, but a dreadful certainty pushed me onward. I had to see what was behind that panel. Every nerve in my body screamed in dread, yet I kept prying. I grabbed a discarded metal candlestick from the floor and jammed it into a gap along the plywood. With a hard heave, I pried the panel. The warped board gave way with a shriek, nails popping loose. It toppled inward and hit the floor behind the wall with a dull thud. A rush of foul, stagnant air puffed out of the darkness. Coughing, I lifted my flashlight and aimed it into the opening, squinting through the dust. At first, I saw only blackness. Then the beam caught something pale and curved. I tilted the light and saw another and another. They were faces. 3 faces, or rather 3 skulls, staring back at me with empty eye sockets. I staggered backwards, a scream clawing up my throat. Inside that hidden cavity were 3 bodies. They were long dead, mummified by time, their flesh shrunken and leathery over bones. They had been forced into the cramped space upright, shoulder to shoulder. Brittle clumps of hair draped their skulls. One wore the remnants of a floral dress. The second had a tattered nurse's uniform. The third, in the middle, still had a decaying red sweater clinging to its skeletal frame. I recognized that red sweater from the photo of Helen Morgan in the newspaper. My stomach lurched violently. The missing women, they never left the building. They were here the whole time, entombed in the wall next door to me. A strangled sob escaped me. Tears blurred my vision as I realized what this meant. All those nights, the screams, the scratching, Helen and the others had been right there, screaming to be found, scratching at their tomb, hands shaking. I fumbled for my phone to call for help. I was shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. Suddenly, behind me, a floorboard groaned. A strong arm seized me around the neck and a rough hand clamped over my mouth. I hadn't heard anyone enter, but I instantly knew who it was. Mr. Greeley had been watching, waiting for me to uncover his secret. I thrashed in panic as he yanked me backward from the gaping hole in the wall. My flashlight flew from my hand and rolled across the floor, its beam dancing crazily. In those wild shadows, I caught a glimpse of his face beside mine, eyes wide with fury and fear. "Should have kept your nose out of it," he snarled in my ear. Muffled against his grimy hand, I screamed as best I could, my legs kicking. I twisted and managed to sink my teeth into the flesh of his palm as hard as I could. He howled and let go just enough for me to break free. I spun away, gasping for air, and in that moment I screamed at the top of my lungs. The sound tore out of me, raw and desperate. Mr. Greeley moved to block the bedroom doorway, cutting off my escape. In his other hand, he held a long screwdriver, the metal tip already dark with my blood from where he'd slashed my arm. He must have brought it expecting trouble. You killed them," I choked out, edging away toward the corner. My voice was ragged with shock and anger. "They deserved it," he hissed, advancing with the screwdriver raised. His face was a contorted mask of madness. "Filthy, ungrateful girls. I cleaned up this building. I kept it quiet, and no one's going to believe a crazy little thing like you. Anyway." His words turned my stomach. He truly was insane. He lunged forward, jabbing the screwdriver straight at my chest. I jerked aside, and pain seared across my upper arm as the tip sliced through my shirt and into flesh. I cried out, stumbling back against the closet. Mr. Greeley charged again, wild-eyed. In a blind flurry, I hurled my phone at him. The heavy device cracked him right between the eyes, and he staggered with a grunt. I seized the moment and dove toward the doorway. He recovered fast. With a snarl, he body-slammed me against the wall. My back hit the edge of the hidden opening. An explosion of agony shot through my ribs and head. We grappled, knocking into the wall that hid the corpses. I lashed out with a desperate kick. Striking his knee, he buckled with a curse, momentarily losing balance. And then, in one horrifying instant, the nightmare he created came for him. As Mr. Greeley stumbled, one of the mummified bodies in the wall toppled forward. The corpse in the red sweater fell out of the cavity and collapsed onto his back, its bony arms draping around his shoulders. Mr. Greeley shrieked, a sound of pure primal terror. He spun and staggered into the middle of the room, trying to shake off the clinging remains. The skull lolled over his shoulder as if peering at him. He clawed at the corpse, and in his frenzy, he tripped over the fallen plywood panel. Both man and corpse crashed to the floor. I scrambled away on all fours, chest heaving. He screamed and thrashed, entangled with the skeletal body. It was a ghastly sight, like the dead had risen to drag him down. I pressed myself against the far wall, watching in morbid disbelief. His face turned beet red, then purple. He was gasping, eyes bulging, one hand clutching at his chest. Between the shock and his feeble heart, his body was giving up. In seconds, Mr. Greeley went still. His limbs jerked once and then collapsed limp. Only the dead woman remained atop him, her hollow eyes staring past him into nothing. A strangled sob caught in my throat. It was over. The killer was dead, frightened literally to death by his own victims. I snatched up my flashlight, hands slick with sweat and blood, and ran. I tore out of 4C and into the hallway, screaming for help. For anyone. The police arrived within minutes, alerted by frantic calls from neighbours who finally heard the commotion. What followed was a surreal blur. I remember leading officers into 4C, my whole body trembling as I pointed to the open wall and the horrors inside. I remember a young cop recoiling, crossing himself at the sight of the 3 mummified corpses. More police came, then the coroner and forensic teams. Dawn was colouring the sky by the time they carefully carried the remains of those women out of the building in black body bags. They also wheeled away the corpse of Mr. Greeley. His eyes were still open, frozen in an expression of absolute dread. In death, he looked as frightened as his victims must have been. In the days that followed, I never once went back into that apartment. I stayed with Ellie, unable to sleep, jumpy at every sound. The story of the Holloway horror made the news. I learned that Mr. Greeley had indeed been the superintendent a decade ago when those tenants vanished. He had used his access and authority to prey on them, then walled up their bodies to hide the evidence of his evil. If I hadn't persisted, those poor women might have remained there forever. Eventually, I moved to a new apartment across town, trying to rebuild some semblance of a normal life. But I can never unsee what I saw or unhear those midnight screams. To this day, I can't stand the sound of scratching walls or a distant cry in the night. Even now, I wake in darkness with my heart pounding, convinced for a split second that I'm back in 4B, that Helen is still begging to be found. Not long ago, I heard that a new tenant moved into my old Unit 4B. On her very first night, she complained about an odd scratch sound coming from the supposedly empty apartment next door. The whispers have begun again. Walls remember, and in Unit 4C, the forgotten never rest.
Every story has an end, but here, the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.